Hello and welcome. You're watching another edition of Captains of Industry. I've traveled a fair bit around the world, and I have to say there are very few airports where I have seen the word dnata and thought, that looks and sounds familiar. Now, by their own admission, the company employs more than 39,000 people across all 6 continents in the world in 37 countries. Certainly one of the largest air services companies in the world, and the subject of our focus today. Please help me to welcome the CEO of the group, that's Steve Allen. Steve, thanks for chatting to us from location Africa, to be precise, Zanzibar. What story do you bring to that part of the continent?
Well, thank you. Great to be here. I'm here in Zanzibar at the airport, in fact, in one of our training rooms, not in my office, which is why the backdrop looks slightly different. We're today officially launching the operations at the new terminal building in Zanzibar, which is our first foray into the African continent, and we'll be providing ground handling and cargo handling services to all of the airlines that come to Zanzibar.
So talk to me about the kind of investment that we're talking about here and what brought you to Zanzibar in particular.
So we responded to a tender for Zanzibar. They had a new airport built by a Chinese company a few years ago, and they wanted somebody to help them to run the airport and bring it up to sort of world-class standards. The build is certainly world-class, and I hope that what we'll provide is operations and services that are world-class as well. The selection was actually quite a unique air services selection. We took on both the ground handling, the cargo handling, and also with our sister companies in Emirates Leisure Retail, we run all the shops in the airport, and also we have lounges, and we provide the duty free. So we've managed to put a package together with a French company called Aegis, who operates the infrastructure, a sort of a one-stop package to elevate the standard of Zanzibar Airport and to really bring it into world class.
Sounds like it's time to go to Zanzibar. Never mind, we should have been there before anyway, because the place is beautiful, as we all know. But I wanted to know if Zanzibar is going to be the one stop that you make on the continent, see how it works, and then assess if you do need to go into other parts of the continent, or is perhaps that part of a larger plan to look at the continent in a different light?
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think it is, as I said, it's our first step into Africa, but, Africa is not far from our home in Dubai. And so really, I took over the business 2 years ago, about 18 months ago, actually. And it was the first question I asked was, why are we not more invested into Africa? It's an up and coming continent. The infrastructure is steadily improving. And people always say, that the entry and exit to the African continent, the standards could be uplifted through the airports. And I think that's a role we can play. So when the Zanzibar opportunity came, we decided that we would go for it 110%. And 14 months later, I'm absolutely delighted with what I'm seeing here. I really think in that short space of time, you now have a world-class airport terminal in East Africa that they should be proud of.
Yeah. Do you have perhaps plans for the rest of the continent? I know in this part of the world, there certainly would be competition for you, but I would imagine from a passenger perspective, competition would be a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, we'd like to look at, other destinations in Africa, and we are looking at other destinations in Africa.
Okay.
And in fact, the partner that we have worked with here in Zanzibar, Aegis, have multiple projects going on across Africa that we're talking with them about, and we're interested in any other opportunities as well. So I would have thought within sort of the next 5 years we'll be in at least 4 or 5 more locations in Africa, if not more.
Give me an outsider's perspective of the continent. I mean, we like to think that we are attractive. We've got the youngest population in the world. Therefore, if you're thinking about the future, we are a place where you ought to be. We also like to think that we've got a fantastic story that's coming through with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, the largest, promising to be the largest in the world, and I'd imagine that would appeal as well. But give me your view when you think and you talk about the continent, what you see and how you feel about employing capital here.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm a huge fan of Africa, and it's got so much to offer. It's such a diverse set of climates, and obviously a huge continent. But it's always been one of the more difficult places to do business. And speaking frankly, that's led companies to invest elsewhere. And I think that we have to make sure that as an outside company coming into Africa, we are welcomed, that we're well structured, that we can move things along at pace, and that means that we need to work with local governments and local businesses to act in a way that will enable that. And that means that we need to overcome any corruption issues. We need to overcome any red tape that gets in the way, to be able to move things forward. And when you invest large amounts of capital into any location, you also want the comfort that you'll get a reasonable return and be able to extract the funds as well, back to your shareholder. And in some cases that's been a challenge as well. So I'm hoping all of the development that's going on across the African continent and the all of the various trade bodies and everything working together will mean that Africa will be able to be an easier place to do business. And therefore, somewhere where companies from outside Africa like ourselves will see it as a first choice, not a last choice.
Yeah, you referred to infrastructure in your answer to, I think, my first or second question. And I wanted to know what kind of infrastructure you require and whether you see perhaps certain places where that isn't there, where if it were there, you would be there.
Well, we don't build infrastructure, so we don't build airports or roads or anything like that. So taking an airport that is, that has not had investment in the past and turning it into world class, requires partnerships and requires investment coming from elsewhere before we would come in. Zanzibar was a fantastic opportunity because the major capital expenditure had already been put in place, as I say, working with a Chinese construction company. So we came off the back of that, and I think that's where we'd like to play. We know that there are various other large airport construction projects going on across the continent, be it in Guinea or in Zambia or other places around the region. And we'd like to come off the back of those. We are talking, as I say, to many of, particularly the East African countries, about what their plans are for airports and how we can fit in. What's absolutely true is that a world-class airport leads to world-class and improved trade and also higher visitors numbers from a leisure point of view. So in my view, it's a very solid investment. It's something which is a long-term investment, but it's something that I think pays back fairly quickly once you make that that capital commitment.
Yeah, very quickly, the corruption story that you referred to earlier, I wanted to know if it's something that you have confronted and if something that has kept you out of certain places on the continent.
That's a tough question, because I don't really want to talk in detail about.
You don't need to mention anyone by name, but I just wanted to get a general perception.
I think you probably know more about it than I do, to be honest.
Okay, I'll take your answer and I'll move on. Okay, so I wanted to widen the conversation a little bit so we can talk about the environment that was created by COVID, the disruption that we saw as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, disruption, as they said, all around the world of our global supply chains. A quick update. Where are we from your operations in terms of normalizing again?
So I think globally we're at about 75% of the airline seats that were in the air pre-COVID are now back in the air. So the recovery from COVID has progressed incredibly rapidly since the beginning of last year, really going from west to east. So the Americas sort of opened up first, then Europe, and then now you can see Australia and New Zealand have opened up about 7 or 8 months ago, and the Far East is now open to a certain extent, but some locations still requiring vaccine certificates and PCR tests. And then, of course, the big one is China, which opened its doors at the beginning of this month, and we're starting to see the Chinese movements happening again. So I think once China truly reopens, then that number of 75 will make another step change up to the 80 to 85s. And then it's really down to the airline's ability to get back in the skies, ramp up their operations in time to get back in the skies. And for us, what that means is we're in 37 countries around the world, from Brazil to the US to Europe, all the way across to Singapore and Australia. We've seen our recovery go with that wave of recovery, and learnt along the way. And the Russia-Ukraine situation has certainly made it difficult. The inflation has really been picked up. It's pushed the world towards a recessionary window, which we're not clear quite where that is going forwards. But certainly from an aviation point of view, we're confident that the recovery is going pretty well and pretty fast.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'd like to add would be that the pent-up demand for travel, which we all said would happen once COVID finished, people had been starved of the opportunity to travel. We said there'd be a pent-up demand for travel. The pent-up demand has been nothing short of incredible, and we literally cannot get aircraft seats back in the sky fast enough.
Which is fantastic, because then that will bring a normalcy to all parts of the world. But I wanted to know, when you see 100%, i.e. we're back to where we were and we begin to grow again, that's the first part. The second part of that question is, I wanted to know also what that has changed in terms of your business, your ability to do your work.
So some parts of the world are already back up at 100%. So the Americas back up to 100%. Parts of our home base in Dubai is now back up to 100%. Other parts of the world still recovering. I think it's going to be back end of 23, maybe sort of first quarter of 24 before you see 100% numbers start to appear across the board. But that is infinitely faster than everybody was predicting when we were in the middle of COVID. People were talking about 26, 27. So it just shows how an industry can be brought to a virtual standstill and then recover at phenomenal speed. And that hasn't happened without its pitfalls. There have been challenges along the way, but yeah, I'm really pleased to say it looks like everything's coming back pretty quickly. Yeah. The one anomaly at the moment, which affects our business as well, is that world cargo is taking a dip, and there's a number of reasons for that. I think one is people started home sourcing because they were reliant on cargo and goods coming from other countries, and when those channels were cut off and the supply chains were cut off, they realized how vulnerable they were, that they started to set up supply chains closer to home. So that obviously requires less sort of east to west, north to south air freight shipping. So that's down. But also in a recession, when you're heading to a recession, you normally see a dip in the demand for air cargo anyway, because people are simply spending less money on goods.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that as well. So the global air cargo business is probably 10 to 12% below what it would normally be, at this time of year. Yeah. So that's a concern for this year. We'll have to see how that progresses in line with, all of the pressures in global economics.
Yeah. Let me ask you a difficult question. Oh, sorry, you were going to add something else?
I think you asked me, how it changed our business.
Yes.
I think cargo was the savior of the air travel business during COVID, and we realized the importance of air freight. And it's led us to invest more in air freight, to digitize a lot more on the air freight side, to make customs processes and paperwork easier. And the whole air travel or air services industry is now really embracing cargo as part of the overall, sort of value chain of the business like never before. So cargo certainly has become more important. And then I think the second thing is, as people were restricted in their movements, processes had to be put in place to create checks and balances around medical certificates and all those things. And that really slowed down and harmed the passenger experience around air travel around the world. And therefore, the air travel business is determined that it will set itself up to be much more digitized, much more connected, just in case these things happen in future. And that's a real focus for our business.
Yeah. So do you think that change that has sort of in part been forced upon you is permanent? or you think at some point you'll be able to go back again to what it was before?
I don't think anybody wants to go back to where it was before. I think, out of bad hopefully comes good. And never let a crisis go to waste, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's been some incredible innovation and new technology that we've all embraced over the COVID period, which we need to continue on with. And so, yeah, we certainly don't want to go back to being the company we were pre-COVID. We've made some step changes in some of our capability, which we'd like to carry forward.
Yeah. The Russia-Ukraine war has brought with it a division that some are likening to the kind of divisions that we saw post the Second World War. And I wanted to know two things. One, if that change is in part providing an explanation for the cargo volumes that you spoke about. And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question. We in the markets, we have seen a reduction in exposure of Western-based companies to China and the East, and of course, obviously, Russia. And then the second part to that question, I wanted also to know if that has in any way changed your focus in terms of areas where you want to grow as a result of these now growing divisions, which are unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great observation. That's exactly what I was referring to with this home sourcing type solution. The big cargo movements were always east to west, west to east. And obviously some of the big sources of that were China, were Russia, into Europe and into the Americas. And, that, if you like, was the prime movement of cargo across the world. And, the fattest routes, if you like, were between those parties. And what you're seeing now is, from China, sort of sources have switched to maybe India or South Asia, or into Eastern Europe or into South America. And so Europe is now sourcing goods from different locations, the same with the Americas. And so you're seeing completely different channels of cargo and trade that I think, will... the world has effectively, as you've said, the geopolitics have started to split the world, but also the world has been through a massive shock, and they're looking to reduce their exposure to one single country to make sure if those shocks come along again, they won't just be dependent on one country or one trade body. So I could see a completely redefinition of where all the trade is moving to and coming from as we come out of this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember the time when we were referring to China as the manufacturing plant factory of the world. I suppose that description is going to be one of those footnotes in history. I wanted to talk about one of the conversations of our time, climate change. And I see from the notes that I got from you guys that you guys are also committed to this fight. In fact, you want to reduce your carbon footprint by 50% to 2030. And I was wondering how a company like yourselves reduces its carbon footprint.
Yeah, so, obviously, really, really important topic, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because every business now has to adapt to survive. So, what we're doing, we basically generate carbon footprint through our vehicles that we have. If you go to an airport, you said earlier on, actually, Godfrey, that you never saw dnata. Well, if you look out of the window of the plane when you're in an airport, you'll see us on the ground everywhere. So we have all the vehicles at the airport, which obviously traditionally have been diesel powered. We're switching those to sustainable fuels. So mainly, if the airport infrastructure allows, that will be electric, but also hydrogen, I think, is a future fuel source as well. And we're working really closely with the manufacturers of all those vehicles to see how quickly we can move to those sustainable vehicles. And then the other thing that we have is big infrastructure. So we have cargo warehouses, we have vehicle maintenance facilities, we have catering production facilities. And we want to make sure that those are sustainable buildings. So, solar panels on the roofs or recycling of water, all these things that we can do. And then I guess the third thing for us is that we're part of an aviation ecosystem, and we can work with the rest of aviation to make sure that we use more recyclable materials, that we can support the introduction of sustainable aviation fuel through the way that we fuel aircraft. So working with the airport community, the airports and the airlines. But ours, if you like, is the easier thing because we already have electric cars and we already have solar panels on roofs. We just need to put them on all of our equipment and facilities. I think the big challenge for the industry is aviation fuel, and that's something that we obviously are partnering with people to develop.
Absolutely. We look forward to hold that one working, certainly, without question. Difficult operating environment that you are in. And just in closing, I wanted to talk a little bit about the man behind the business that we've been talking about. I see you've been CEO since 2021, so this is year number 2. How has it been?
Ooh.
Some people have been saying
Yeah.
this time that we've gone through is probably the most challenging that they have ever seen in their professional lives. Would you say the same?
Yeah, there's certainly been easier years of my life. You know, it is unprecedented. You know, coming out of a pandemic and the incredible growth and pent-up demand that we've seen have meant that we've had to just react, you know, every day to changing environments. Every country has evolved and emerged in a different way, depending on what the government's approach has been to opening up their countries. This has led to, you layer on top of that, you've got the Russia-Ukraine crisis, which has led to big cost inflation of commodities and foodstuffs. So we've had rapid inflation in many locations. We've had wage inflation. So yeah, it's certainly been a really challenging time. But you know what's very true is that, you know, my job and the job of every business leader is to solve these complex issues, you know, and make sure that we find a way through them. And I've actually quite enjoyed it, to be honest. I know that sounds it sounds wrong, but you know, this is what we train all our lives to do. And you know, the brilliant thing that, you know, I'm privileged to have is I've got an amazing team, a very, very experienced team around me. And you know, some of the best people in my industry want to work for dnata, and so, you know, it's not me that does the work, it's them, really.
Yeah. And I certainly agree with you. But what it has also done for some people is to change their perceptions of things, change their perceptions on life. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to do that. But I wanted to ask the question, you are British or originally from the UK, but you have been a Middle Eastern, as it were, for many, many years. What brought you there? How did you get in?
That's correct. Well, they let me in, you know, which may or may not have been a good idea. But I was actually working for British Airways at the time, and I visited Dubai to play football, and I loved it. I had a great weekend and really enjoyed it. And I thought to myself, as a guy in his mid-20s, this is a place that I'd love to live and work. So I gradually convinced my boss at British Airways that I needed an overseas placement, and maybe that could be in Dubai. And so they sent me to Dubai as the financial controller. I'm a trained accountant, so I went as financial controller, and then stayed on for 5 years with British Airways. Went back to London to run Heathrow for BA for 5 years, and then decided I loved you know, the Middle East so much that I'd go back again. And you know, I've certainly been rewarded. I've watched you know, I've watched the whole region of the world grow at incredible rates. You know, amazing innovation, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved in the 23 years that I've been involved.
Interesting. Were you the footballer who became an accountant, or was that always the plan?
I was the accountant that never really became a footballer.
I see. So from here, where do you go? I mean, you are sitting, as we discussed at the beginning of the program, atop one of the largest air services companies in the world. You did tell me that actually you guys are the second largest.
That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, this is something that you know, I'm passionate about, making aviation something that people enjoy, and that it just facilitates the whole global movement of people and trade around the world in the most seamless and you know, enjoyable way. And there are many, many bottlenecks in our industry that need to be removed. I think there's a huge amount of innovation that can come into the industry, which, you know, we have a tremendous opportunity to do. So I guess I moved from being somebody who just wants to look after just my company and my role to somebody who wants to be a part of something bigger. And I'm involved in global bodies that are working towards that. I really believe that's only possible through collaboration between all of the supply chain in the aviation industry, and I'm sort of tied in with that. So yeah, I guess my passion is actually for people to turn around to me at the dinner table and say, I love travel and it's so easy. And that's kind of where I'd like to leave the industry when I finally am allowed to retire.
I can assure you at the dinner table, you'll not find many people who don't say they do want to travel the globe. We're certainly looking forward to seeing more dnata signages and vehicles around the African continent. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
That's Steve Allen, Group CEO of dnata, chatting to us about his journey, chatting to us about a very important component of all of our economies. Of course, we have been talking about supply chain disruptions across the African continent, across the world, and the impact it has had, resulting in one of the biggest crises of our times, which is, of course, the cost of living. But that's the program for today. Thank you for watching Captains of Industry. Until next time, goodbye.